Today, we are diving into one of the most incredible stories in science. It's about a quest to answer a question as old as humanity itself, a quest that accidentally uncovered a massive, invisible crisis that was poisoning the entire planet.
It all started with this number. This was the prize. This was the answer a scientist named Claire Patterson was absolutely determined to find, solving a mystery that had stumped people for literally thousands of years. You see, Patterson wanted to pin down, once and for all, the definitive age of the Earth. For centuries, people had guessed, thinking it was maybe a few thousand years old. By the 1940s, the best guess was around 3.3 billion years. But nobody really knew. Patterson was going to be the guy to change all that. But here's the twist in the story. What if the journey to find our planet's true birthday revealed something absolutely terrifying? A secret poison that was everywhere, in the air, in the water, in us, all thanks to something we used every single day. Okay, so let's start with part one, a contaminated quest. This is all about our scientist, Claire Patterson, and his mission, which was noble for sure, but also deeply, deeply frustrating. So who was this guy, Claire Patterson? Well, to put it simply, he was brilliant, a top-tier geochemist. He'd even worked on the Manhattan Project, separating uranium isotopes. That work made him one of the world's few experts at using this incredible machine called a mass spectrometer, a device so sensitive it could literally sort individual atoms by their weight. That skill was about to become absolutely crucial. The method he was going to use is called uranium-lead dating. Now, think of it like this. Uranium is like a perfect cosmic clock. Over billions of years, it reliably breaks down. It decays into stable lead. So if you can measure the ratio of uranium to lead in a super old rock, you can calculate exactly when that rock was formed. The only problem, Earth's rocks have been melted and recycled over and over. Patterson needed something pure, something left over from the birth of the solar system itself. He needed a meteorite. But he immediately slammed into a massive wall. Every single experiment was a failure. It was completely ruined. His pristine meteorite samples, his lab equipment, even just the dust floating in the air, it was all contaminated with these huge amounts of lead. Way, way more than could ever have come from natural uranium decay. There was this unnatural amount of lead simply everywhere. And the question was, where on earth was it all coming from? To answer that, we actually have to leave Patterson struggling in his lab for a minute and jump back in time a few decades, to the roaring 1920s and the dawn of the automobile age. So early cars had this really big problem called engine knock. It was this awful, violent, rattling sound that happened when the fuel in the engine would ignite too early. It wasn't just annoying, it was terrible for the car. It wasted fuel and could totally wreck the engine. So the race was on to find some kind of chemical you could add to gasoline to make it burn better. The guy leading the charge was an engineer named Thomas Midgley Jr., and he tried pretty much everything. Ethanol, alcohol, it actually worked pretty well, but you needed a lot of it, which made it way too expensive. And then, in 1921, he found it. Tetraethyl lead, or TEL, and it was a miracle. Just a tiny amount stopped engine knock cold. It was incredibly cheap to make, and it seemed like the perfect solution. Now, the companies behind this knew that even back then, the word lead had a pretty bad reputation. People knew it was dangerous. So they made a very, very clever marketing decision. They didn't call the product leaded gasoline, no. They named the additive ethyl, which just so happened to sound a lot like the safe but expensive ethanol. It was a brilliant, and you have to say, a deeply cynical piece of marketing. The truth, though, was not going to stay hidden for long. Just a couple of years later, a factory making ethyl had this horrific accident. Workers started hallucinating, they became violently insane, and then they started dying. This New York Times headline from 1924 just says it all. To try and calm everyone down, the inventor, Thomas Midgley, actually held a press conference where he poured the lead additive all over his hands and then inhaled its fumes for a full minute, telling everyone he could do it every day, no problem. He was lying through his teeth. Okay, now let's jump forward again to the 1950s. Claire Patterson is still completely stuck. He cannot get a clean reading. But he's starting to get a nagging suspicion that the answer to his lab's contamination problem and the story of ethyl gasoline might just be connected. So Patterson needed a way to compare the natural world to the modern world, and his idea was just genius.
He decided to compare the lead levels in deep, ancient ocean water with the levels right at the surface. And the result was unmistakable. The surface water, which is exposed to our atmosphere, had 10 times more lead than the deep ocean. This wasn't natural. This was recent, and it was man-made pollution. And then came the chilling aha moment. Patterson did the math. He calculated the tons and tons of lead being spewed out by cars burning ethyl gasoline every single year. And that number? It was a perfect match for all the excess lead he was finding everywhere in the environment. The mystery was solved. The contamination was coming from the tailpipe of every car on the road. So after 7 long years of this painstaking work, Patterson finally got a clean sample. He calculated the Earth's age at 4.55 billion years, the very same number we still use today. But his real work was just beginning. He now knew about a global poison, and he just couldn't stay silent. And this began his decades-long fight against one of the most powerful industries on the entire planet. The second Patterson published his findings about all this lead pollution, the industry came after him, hard. The American Petroleum Institute, which had been funding his work, cut him off immediately. A powerful oil executive who was on his university's board tried to get him fired. He was even offered these huge, juicy research grants if he would just agree to study, well, anything else, anything but lead. He said no. So Patterson doubled down. He traveled to the absolute cleanest places on Earth, Greenland and Antarctica, to collect ancient ice cores. I mean, these things are like a frozen timeline of our atmosphere going back centuries. And what he found was just staggering. The amount of lead in modern ice was somewhere between 200 and 300 times higher than in ice from before the Industrial Revolution. And he didn't stop there. He got permission to analyze the bones of a 4,500-year-old Peruvian mummy, and then he compared them to the bones of modern Americans. The result? It was horrifying. The average American at the time had 600 times more lead in their body than their ancient ancestors. We were all, every one of us, being slowly and systematically poisoned. And what did the industry do when faced with this mountain of evidence? They denied it, flat out. The American Petroleum Institute put out official statements, just like this one, claiming the science proved there was no threat. They hired their own scientists to attack Patterson's credibility, calling him just some naive geologist who didn't know anything about biology or health. But Claire Patterson never, ever gave up. For more than 20 years, he kept researching, he testified before Congress, and he fought like hell for the truth. And eventually, the truth won. You know, his research was a huge reason the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970. Then, in 1976, the EPA began the mandatory phase-out of leaded gasoline in the U.S. Tragically, Patterson passed away in 1995, right before the fuel was completely banned in America. But his fight didn't end with him. And finally, in 2021, nearly 100 years after it was introduced, leaded gasoline was officially banned worldwide. And the impact of that ban? It was nothing short of a public health miracle. Just look at this chart. Between 1976, when the phase-out started, and 1995, the year Patterson died, the average blood lead level in the American population dropped by an incredible 80%. This one man's fight saved millions of lives and prevented untold brain damage in children. You know, Patterson's story is just this powerful reminder that a single, determined scientist really can change the world. But it also leaves us with a pretty important question. His battle was against a poison that was invisible, it was everywhere, and it was defended by incredibly powerful interests. So the question we really have to ask ourselves is, what invisible poisons might we be ignoring today?